Brought to you by the Dark Lord himself, Queasy Ali. I keep hearing this loud, non-stop chant online: the Star Wars sequels are trash. They ruined Star Wars. Nobody liked them. And I'm sitting here like, okay. Are we talking about personal taste, or are we talking about reality? Because those are two different conversations. If somebody says, I hated the vibe, or the comedy killed the tone, or I didn't like the character decisions, cool. That's taste. That's valid. But when people try to rewrite history and act like the sequel trilogy was some kind of box office disaster that nobody wanted, that's not taste anymore. That's mythology. So let's ground this in something real. Not vibes. Not nostalgia. Not internet anger. Numbers. And not just raw numbers, because the originals came out when movie tickets were cheaper, the dollar was stronger, and the world was a different place. So we're going to look at worldwide box office two ways. First, what each trilogy earned worldwide in the dollars of its time. Second, what those totals look like when you adjust for inflation into modern dollars. And before anyone jumps me, yes, inflation adjusting worldwide grosses is imperfect, because ticket prices and inflation aren't identical in every country. But it's still a fair way to compare eras, because it answers the real question people argue about. How big was this, really, in its time? Alright. Here we go. Let's start with the raw worldwide totals. The original trilogy, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, adds up to about 1.8 billion worldwide. The prequel trilogy, The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, comes in around 2.6 billion worldwide. And the sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, lands at about 4.5 billion worldwide. So in raw dollars, the sequels aren't just fine. They're a monster. But people will say, yeah, but that's because everything is more expensive now. Of course it made more. Okay. Let's adjust. Using CPI inflation adjustment into 2024 dollars, the picture gets way more interesting. The original trilogy, adjusted, comes out to about 7.6 billion. The prequel trilogy, adjusted, lands around 4.6 billion. And the sequel trilogy, adjusted, lands around 5.8 billion. So even after you adjust for inflation, the sequels still beat the prequels by about 1.2 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's not basically the same. That's a whole extra blockbuster's worth of distance. And now comes the part that really flips the internet narrative on its head. Because everybody knows the original trilogy has the big monster in the room. A New Hope. That first movie wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural detonation. A once-in-a-generation lightning strike. So if we remove A New Hope, the biggest foundational wave, and we only compare the remaining two original trilogy films, Empire and Jedi, adjusted to modern dollars, they total about 3.6 billion. 3.6. Now compare that to the sequel trilogy, adjusted, at about 5.8 billion. So even if you take out the first monster movie that launched the entire franchise, the sequels still come out higher. Which means this whole nobody wanted the sequels narrative collapses under basic math. Now, does that mean the sequels are better than the originals? No. Box office isn't a quality meter. It's a popularity meter mixed with timing, marketing, hype, and culture. But it does mean one thing very clearly: the sequels were not rejected by the public in the way the internet pretends they were. So why does it feel like they were? Because Star Wars doesn't get judged like normal franchises. Star Wars gets judged like religion. People don't just like Star Wars. They identify with it. They grew up on it. They attach their childhood to it. So when something feels wrong in tone, or pacing, or style, people don't react like, not for me. They react like they were personally betrayed. And honestly, I get the biggest complaint. The comedy. That's the one part where I'm like, yeah. Okay. I see it. Because Star Wars can have humor, but it's supposed to be grounded humor. It's supposed to be character-driven. Not constant tension-breaking, self-aware, Marvel-style punchlines every 5 minutes. If you pull a lot of that comedy out, and you let the story breathe like a serious space opera, the sequels instantly feel stronger. Because the core story pieces aren't nothing. They're not empty. They're not the apocalypse people claim. And visually, the sequels are the best-looking Star Wars films ever made. That's not even debatable. The cinematography, the lighting, the scale, the effects, they're gorgeous. So what we really have is this: a trilogy that made enormous money, pulled massive audiences, and delivered the strongest visuals in the franchise. But got dragged into the ground because the tone, especially the comedy, kept breaking the spell. That's a very different story than the sequels failed. They didn't fail. They succeeded so hard that even inflation adjusted they out-earned the prequels by over $1 billion. And if you remove the single biggest outlier movie in the entire saga, the one that started it all, the sequels still beat what remains of the originals too. So maybe the honest conclusion is simple. The sequels weren't some worthless disaster. They were a massively successful trilogy with a tone problem. Not a nobody watched it problem. Not a nobody wanted it problem. A tone problem, and that's why the internet rage doesn't match the real world results. Because people confuse I didn't like the vibe with it didn't matter. But the world showed up. And the numbers prove it. Queasy Ali, the man, the myth, the legend. The icon aka the Dark Lord. Hashtag Revolution 2025 Hashtag Chaos Rising 2025 Hashtag Southpaw Rebellion 2025 Hashtag Star Wars Hashtag Sequel Trilogy Hashtag Film Talk